As the election season rolls on, the sense of the tectonic diplomatic plates beginning at last to shift on the issue of Palestine is palpable. The victor of the French elections yesterday, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, made a special point of an important priority, an immediate priority for the government he intends to form to recognize the Palestinian state. Of course, the issue is where and how and what will be the impact of such a thing. But nonetheless, the elections in France, in the United Kingdom, in the United States are all proceeding with the issue of Palestine at the heart of it. I was a friend of President Arafat from 1977, and I was at his bedside when he died in the Percy Military Hospital in Paris. When I came out in the early morning hours after the president's demise, I saw more television cameras assembled than I have ever seen anywhere ever in my life. And I got to thinking how this small man, the leader of a small country, had become the moral center of the world. And it's no different. Indeed, it's even more pointedly so after the events in the last 9 months or so since October the 7th. Gaza, Palestine, is the moral center of the world, and no one can ignore it, even when they are busy trying to ignore it. It has inflicted strategic damage on the presidency of Joseph Biden. It has afflicted the political class in France, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, with real serious problems. The governments that have supported Netanyahu to the ultimate extent, ad nauseum, repeating their apologia for Israel's right to defense and its right to cut off the people of Palestine from water, electricity, and power, have lost millions of votes. In the British general election last week, it is undoubtedly true that not only were parliamentary seats lost by the now governing Labour Party, but millions of votes were lost even in constituencies that the Labour Party won. The same is true now in France. And so it is inevitable that at the United Nations, this shifting of the plates is beginning to be felt. Suddenly everyone is talking about what will happen when the guns stop firing, when the bombs stop falling, when the children stop being mutilated, maimed, and murdered. Of course, that's putting the cart before the horse, because the children are still being murdered and mutilated. The bombs still falling on the people of Gaza. But we must suppose, we must pray, hope, and work for the day when the guns stop firing. And what happens next is going to be of special importance. And we have this evening a very special guest indeed, whom I shall introduce properly in a moment or two. But if you are interested in international politics, interested in the Middle East, interested in the ongoing 75-year agony of the Palestinian people, interested in colonialism, interested in imperialism, interested in how foreign policy affects domestic policy, then you've come to the right place. It is Have It Out with Galloway. Francesca Albanese is an appointed United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, the first woman to hold this position. She is an affiliate scholar at the Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown University in Washington. She's widely published on the legal situation in Israel and the state of Palestine, and regularly teaches and lectures on international law and forced displacement at universities in Europe and across the Arab world. She joins us from Italy. Francesca, you are, whether you like it or not, a hero across the world for the courage and eloquence with which you have spoken during this long agony that I described in the introduction, this crucifixion of the Palestinian people, this Via Dolorosa down which the Palestinians have walked. These 75 years past, never mind these past 9 months. Your eloquence, your courage has drawn ire and even hatred from some of the world's worst people, but I want to assure you that the world's best people all love you very much indeed, and it's a great privilege that you should be on the show with us this evening. The first question I want to ask is it correct to talk about the post-conflict situation when the conflict is still raging murderously with a huge death toll, huge ocean of blood still being spilled? Are we putting the cart before the horse?
Hi, George. First of all, thank you for having me, and also thank you for the kind words with which you welcome me. Yeah, I'm aware that I've become sort of a clear, loud voice, particularly in the past 8-9 months, on the what you rightly call the agony of the Palestinian people. Just because I happen to be one of those who has studied the length and the protractedness and the depth of this agony that has been ongoing for 100 years, and part of which is credit to Great Britain. So I do not think that it's right now to think about post-conflict, but simply because I do not think that the word conflict is fully appropriate. Of course, the situation in Palestine or between Israel and Palestine is punctuated by conflict and conflictuality, but conflict might give a sense of a symmetric war between two parties, between two states, between two realities, and this is not the case. This is the most protracted occupation of modern history, preceded by one of the most catastrophic injustices of the post-Second World War, which was started before the beginning of the Second World War. And the Palestinians are still paying the consequences. This is a settler colonial reality and should be treated as such. And it is to be understood as such, George, because only understanding what is the finality of settler colonialism, meaning taking the land, taking the resources of the indigenous people, one can understand how to end conflictuality. Israel has historically, not Israel necessarily as a state, but Israel with this idea of being the state of the Jews first and foremost, has been at war with the Palestinians since the very beginning. If we do not understand, if we do not realize this, it's going to be difficult to imagine a post. A post what? Surely what the Palestinians fear the most now, not only is the ongoing genocide, but the fact that people can normalize this new reality and may want for the Palestinians to return to the status quo ante, which was horrific anyway.
Yes, indeed, this normalization of horror on an unprecedented scale, at least in terms of being able to actually watch it. There have been many horrific episodes in human history, even modern human history, but we didn't watch it on our telephones. Our children didn't watch it on their telephones. It's unprecedented in that sense. But the normalization amongst the political class and the official media class is almost complete. We've just had a British general election where Gaza and Palestine was virtually banished from the public discourse, except where it was used as a stick to beat those who wanted to raise the coincidence of a genocide going on alongside a general election. And if anyone did, as one did from the Scottish nationalists on the national TV stage, raise Gaza, it was promptly reframed as an October 7th story rather than a post-October 7th story, and let alone a pre-October 7th story. So they have tried to normalize it, but they have failed, haven't they? Because public opinion everywhere in the world is highly, highly now aroused by this issue and determined to raise their voice, raise their activity level to try and bring it to an end.
Yeah, I think that the shift is profound and irreversible, especially because it has affected a lot the new generations who are also more sensitive, it seems to me, to the concept of justice as a global justice that concerns the environment, that concerns all earthlings, that concerns all people, regardless of race, gender, and nationality or political views. There is a part of the young generations which is inflamed by this need to make the world a better and more just place. At the same time, I'm not optimist as of yet, because I know that, as Ilan Pape says, we are fighting against the system, and it's in clear view. This is not just Israel; is the system that upholds Israel and protects Israel and identifies itself with Israel, and it's very common to other Western states. Therefore, I think that more mobilization is needed, more conscientization and more awakening is needed, and also different segments of society needs to mobilize, not just young people or a few scholars here and there. And actions in the street needs to translate into concrete, it needs to have a concrete impact on something that we can affect. We might not affect tomorrow politics, though I agree with you that the electoral outcome, or in France in particular, but not only, I think to an extent in the UK as well, has significance. But at the same time, economic interest and financial interest needs to be affected, and therefore grassroots movements like the BDS needs to be more supported than ever.
It is an affliction of left and right, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the right, for example, Madame Le Pen, she's called a fascist in some quarters, and yet she is a fanatical supporter of Israel and Netanyahu. Ditto Mr. Orban, who's struggling for peace on the Ukrainian front, but is 100% behind Netanyahu. Ditto Signora Meloni in Italy, another fanatical supporter of Israel. And in the Labour tradition, the social democratic tradition, people like Keir Starmer, if Joe Biden can be called a social democrat, I'm not so sure about that, but the liberal side of politics, they are equally passionately pro-Israel. And that is causing new political formations to aggregate and begin to make progress, like Mr. Mélenchon over the weekend.
Yes, this is happening. But I do see I do understand the connection between Israel and the right-wing forces who have a history like Giorgia Meloni's party of anti-Semitism. It's shocking, I understand at first sight, but we need to see what's the alignment of interests and views and visions out there. Because there is something that is stronger than anti-Semitism, but it has the same roots that anti-Semitism in Europe. Let's be clear, it's still alive and kicking. And it's anti-Arabism, it's Islamophobia. Look at how Europe and the UK treats migrants and refugees coming from the global south, not Ukrainian, of course, but those of darker skin, of different faiths, of really coming from another part of the world that we do not recognize as ours or as close, our brothers and sisters. And this is, again, as I often quote my friend, an Israeli legal scholar, Israeli historian, Ras Sigal, who says, the problem is that after the Second World War, Hitler had been defeated, but not his idea of the purity of the race and of a superior race. It's still here, George. It's still very much entrenched into this, our today's politics, and it can be found across different political spectrum, from right to left, and pretty much everywhere in Europe. And this aligns with Israel's idea of being the defender of Western values and fighting against barbarianism and in lack of civilization that Israel often refers to when it speaks about the Palestinians. So it's racism at the end of the day.
Last question. If Mélenchon forms a government and if France recognizes a Palestinian state, leaving aside which Palestinian state and where, would that change the paradigm in the sense that it would be beginning to look like a conflict between two states, one of them not yet in existence, but widely recognized across the world, including by permanent 5 UN Security Council members like France?
Look, I think that it's important as long as this recognition of the state of Palestine is not merely symbolic. Because, you know, I do think that from a formal point of view, the state of Palestine does exist, but it was born in captivity, so it's not fully developed as a state, as sovereignty. And in this respect, I understand what you mean when you say it doesn't exist yet, because it doesn't exist as an independent sovereign state. So if that recognition means that there is a recognition of full sovereign authority in the state of Palestine, yes, but at the same time, I'm also scared for what it might imply, because on the one hand, it might bring people back to their seats, comforted by the fact that they have done what they could in recognizing the state of Palestine, again, a merely symbolic act. The young generation says unity of the people, unity of the land, and unity of the struggle, where of course the struggle is the struggle to be free as a people. And in a way, the two-state solution is discussed now as a compromise which made sense for many Palestinians 30 years ago, when some territorial compromise could still be made, but not today. And still, it was a compromise that still symbolized a partition and therefore a segregation of the Palestinian people. So I would say, yes, it's important to recognize the state of Palestine, if it also means recognizing the aggression that the state of Israel, Israel's occupation in what remains of Palestine represents. But what is the most important thing, and this is where efforts should be made, in my view, is that the Palestinians are recognized as fully deserving the realization of their right of self-determination, which means right to exist as a people, to determine themselves as a people, politically, culturally, economically. And this doesn't exist under oppression. So let's imagine that tomorrow there is a state of Palestine, and one way or another there is a fine solution that puts everyone in agreement regarding the settlements and the borders and the resources and. But what's going to happen to the Palestinian refugees who are 7 million? I mean, it's not just about going back to the land that they consider their ancestral homelands. Probably they don't even want it, but they want to have the historical injustice recognized for the dismemberment of their people, of their countries 76 years ago. And also, what's going to happen to the Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, who are still treated as a second-class citizens in what was once their Palestinian homeland. So these are all issues that the creation of, the full recognition of a state of Palestine will not resolve per se.
Francesca Albanese, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everything you have done. Well, a provocative interview to some, a tour de force to others. Let's hear what the video wall thinks of the show so far. Scott Khaled is in London. Let's have Scott first. Go ahead, Scott.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. So I'm 21, and you were actually my first vote because you're the only person I align with, and they're all the same lovers. So I just want to say thank you and hope you continue doing what you're doing.
Thanks to you.
My question was, I saw online that the UAE and Saudi Arabia want to put peacekeeping forces in Gaza should there be a ceasefire. And I was just thinking, can they be trusted if they've just sat idle while there's a Holocaust going on? Are they going to serve the Palestinian interests, or are they just going to continue to serve the shekel and continue to serve Israel? Because, like I said, they've sat idle and done nothing while a genocide is going on. So can they be trusted to be, again, a peacekeeping force should there be a ceasefire?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not dodging it when I say that would be up to the Palestinian resistance. If the Palestinian resistance were ready to accept those two countries as peacekeeping forces, and if they believed that this would at least provide a lull, if not a cessation, of what is wholesale slaughter. You called it a Holocaust. You're not wrong. It's not on the same numerical scale as the Holocaust of the Nazis in Europe, but it is a Holocaust nonetheless. In terms of the number of people in Gaza, 2.3 million, at least 250,000 have been murdered or maimed. That's, in percentage terms, a Holocaust by any metric. So the killing is so extreme that it might be the case that the Palestinian resistance was ready to accept the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis, of course, have not recognized Israel. They have resisted normalization, particularly since the Crown Prince, MBS, came to power, and his rapprochement with Iran, and his new relationship with Russia, with China, with the BRICS. The UAE is a country where Israel has diplomatic relations and quite prosperous commercial relations. And so the two of them together might be, I say might, be an acceptable peacekeeping force. The people of the UAE, of course, are just as fervently supportive of the Palestinians as the Saudi people are, their government not so much. But as I say, I'm not dodging this question because I think these issues can only actually be decided by the Palestinian resistance on the ground. Scott, thanks for that very interesting call. Savan Kadir is a journalist in Scotland. Savan, welcome. What would you like to say?
Hi, Mr. Galloway. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for everyone being here. It was a very interesting discussion. So I've got a few questions just because of the time trying to squeeze both in. It's kind of not parallel, it's a different question. So one of them is about the future of Gaza, whether Hamas should be running Gaza and whether that would be a good thing for democracy, and would they respect democracy and its principle. It's not just about, going to vote and the people in Gaza vote for them, but whether they will be good for democracy. As you, of course, we're perfectly aware, the Nazis were voted in as well, but they were not good for democracy. I'm not making an equivalence at all here. The second question is about your credibility, and I hope you forgive me for asking you this question. So since your position was against the Iraq war, which was Iraqi, I'm Kurdish as well, after 2002, in 2002, August 2002, you were there and met Saddam Hussein and many of his cabinet, and at some point you even praised him, given the fact that he killed over 188,000 people, Iraqi people, and used chemical weapon against the Kurd, killed 5,000 of them in 10 or so minutes. So I'm just asking a question, whether you would be the great advocate for peace.
Well, I don't forgive you, as a matter of fact, but I will answer you. First of all, I'm not posing as a great advocate for peace. I'm hosting Have It Out with Galloway, a television show in which you have been allowed to provide your very partial account of history. The second point I'll make is I am intensely proud of the stand that I made for Iraq, the stand that I made in defense of Iraq against the hyenas in the region and against the imperialists abroad who destroyed Iraq, who murdered 1 million people in Iraq. You want to talk about deaths? Britain and the United States murdered 1 million people in Iraq and counting as a result of their invasion and occupation of Iraq. The phenomenon of ISIS and Al-Qaeda cascaded around the whole world, even onto our own streets. If not yet in Scotland, then certainly here in London. That anyone in 2024, in the middle of a genocide in Gaza, should pop up on my show to talk about me and Saddam Hussein simply beggars belief. You're a fool and you're a knave. I don't know which is the greater of your characteristics, but you are a useful idiot for imperialism with the question that you asked and the way that you asked it. Let me tell you, whether I have credibility or not will not be decided by you. It will be decided by history. And I believe that, like others, history will absolve me. Domenico De Leo is up next in London. Domenico, what would you like to say?
Hello, George. Thank you very much for having me. The question I'm going to ask was touched upon earlier on by yourself, but nonetheless, I think will be relevant to ask it anyway. So the genocide in Gaza has been the most horrific and graphic display of unchecked violence against civilians, women, and children in a very long time. But this time, this violence came through us via our social media, and we watched it unfold before our eyes, basically live as it happened. I've not watched most of the more horrific things. I can't bear it. People being dug out of the rubble and children being torn apart. I prefer not to watch that. But I read accounts, I read reports, so I know what was going on. The most amazing thing about all this to me has been the fact that as this happened, the circus in the West, in the so-called free West, keeps going on. The sports events and TV show garbage of all sorts just keeps going, and people just keep living their lives as normal, which to me, it's amazing. And this made me think about the fact that in the 40s, it is said that apart from a very small circle within the Nazi regime and a few other people, not many other people knew about the trains and the camps and what was going on there. And I assume that back then, I'm pretty certain they didn't have mobile phones to show what was going on in the camps on their phones. And therefore, my question is whether Gaza is what awaits us all, in a sense that at one point or another, we can all be targeted and slaughtered live on social media, live for everybody to see, and the world will just keep going as if nothing happens. And whether this is the future that awaits us and whether this is the world we have to get used to.
Well, it's a brilliant question, almost a thesis and a very interesting one. I don't mean that in any pejorative way at all. You're right, of course. We're all fixated by the Euros at the moment. Very soon we'll be fixated by the Olympic Games. And it isn't just a Western circus, by the way. I see advertisements flashing up on social media all the time for all kinds of festivals and exhibitions and jollies, even in the Arab world, particularly in Saudi Arabia, but also in Persian Gulf countries in the Arab world. And it never ceases to strike me as astonishing. I have not been able to live a normal life since October the 7th. I have not been able to enjoy things that I formerly enjoyed to the same extent. I'm not even able to look at my children without thinking of the children I've just looked at on my phone. But some people appear able, and this is where the thesis comes in, some people appear able to separate their lives and their pleasures from the agony of others. I'll give you a little insight. Maybe I shouldn't, but my son, my youngest son, broke his elbow last night, 1 minute before I went on the air with Moats. It's a very serious break. He had to stay overnight. He had an operation today. When I took him into hospital, a very beautiful hospital in our locality, where the staff were, I mean, almost literally angels, where they treated him with such kindness and beneficence, and where everything was clean and every piece of equipment was available, and a surgeon was able, under anesthetic, to open up his elbow and refix it, and so on. All I could think about was Gaza. All I could think about was other people's children being brought into a hospital that is almost entirely destroyed, filthy with blood and death everywhere, where the staff are routinely murdered, where none of this equipment is available, and where the children don't have broken elbows, they have severed limbs, and where they are amputated without anesthesia. That was all I could think of in this pristine piece of heaven, which is the British National Health Service. At least where I live, it's a pristine piece of heaven. But some people appear very able to ignore it. So I am routinely challenged by journalists. Every time I'm interviewed by a journalist, I am challenged as to why I am focused on Gaza. Like being focused on a Holocaust is a bad thing. And I always say to them, if you were a journalist in 1940 and you asked me why I was focused on the Holocaust, who would look better in history? You or me? You who said I should not be focusing on a Holocaust, or me who was doing the focusing? A wonderful question, I must say. Alistair Chambers is in London, a humanitarian. He is described as, we'll quickly find out if that's true. Alistair, go ahead, my friend.
How are you doing, George? With regards to the governments, the United States and the European Union, they have designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. Do you agree with this, or do you support Hamas?
I'm not a supporter of Hamas, no, as I've said ad nauseum. I suspect you've already heard me say so. I'm a supporter of President Arafat and of his successor, the Nelson Mandela of Palestinian politics, Marwan al-Barghouti, who lies in an Israeli dungeon but should be freed and should be the leader of a united Palestinian people. And mentioning Nelson Mandela is quite apposite because the African National Congress, for which I worked underground in apartheid South Africa as an agent of the African National Congress, a medal I'm honored to wear, they were accused by their enemies and by the supporters of their enemies, some of the governments you've just prayed in aid, of being a terrorist organization. Well, Mandela was not a terrorist, even if Mrs. Thatcher called him one. And the ANC and Nelson Mandela were not taken off the American terrorist list until 2008, long after the liberation and long after Mandela had been the elected president of South Africa. He was still on the US terrorist list. So this term is tossed around entirely partially. The terrorists were the apartheid regime. The terrorists are the Israeli occupation. The people who fight against them are the resistance to the occupation. Now, does that mean I supported every action of the African National Congress? No, I did not. And neither any longer do they. The armed wing of the ANC conducted military operations which were rightfully defined as terrorist actions. Ditto Hamas and other Palestinian resistance factions. So killing an old lady in a kibbutz is a terrorist act. Killing an Israeli soldier in a kibbutz is an act of resistance. I'm sure that you as a humanitarian can tell the difference between these two things. Killing a child in occupied Palestine is a terrorist act. Killing an Israeli army officer or security officer is an act of resistance. There are legitimate acts of resistance, and there are acts which can properly be defined and described as terrorists. So I prefer, as someone who does not support Hamas, I prefer to leave the political leadership of the Palestinian people to the Palestinian people. It's not your business or my business who leads the Palestinian people. In Gaza, they voted for Hamas, and the West immediately imposed a total siege on the territory as a result to punish the people for how they had voted. I spoke about it many times in Parliament back in 2008, 2009. I commend those speeches to you. Dr. Matthew Alford is a university professor and was the parliamentary candidate for my own party, the Workers' Party of Britain, in the constituency of Bath, and we are proud of him. Professor, what would you like to say?
Thanks, George, and I hope that your son has a speedy recovery from his broken arm. I was wondering if you, given that we have several new independent MPs who are pro-Gaza in Parliament and several new Green MPs in Parliament, how effective do you think these voices can be? And if you do have chance as well, I had a second question about you being, I wonder how and why you've been maligned and misunderstood so badly over the years, if you do have time to comment on that secondary portion of the question.
Thanks for that, Professor, Doctor. I take a stand. I can do no other. I express my stand, and I think I express it better than most anybody else. I'm hoping someone comes along soon to relieve me of that burden. Why was I expelled by Tony Blair over the Iraq War, when there were many other MPs who were also as vehemently opposed to the Iraq War as me? I like to think it's because my opposition to the Iraq War was more widely heard, was more persuasive, more eloquent, and absolutely irreconcilably opposed to those who were about to invade and occupy Iraq, while others were ready perhaps to temper their opposition. And I take a stand on things that the power is particularly vitally concerned about. And so my opposition matters. I'm not someone who's out campaigning on, you know, trans rights or hug a tree or animal welfare or any of a number of other things that can easily be accommodated by the power. I am campaigning on things that are of vital importance to the power, and if I'm opposing them well, that makes me a target, makes me, and you see the kind of useful idiots that we have, like the first guest this evening. There are people who cannot see the wood for the trees, and unfortunately it'll take some time to properly convert them to see the whole wood rather than have their nose up against one tree and unable to see anything else. On the first issue that you raise, Doctor, remind me again what the first point was.
We've got 4 new MPs who are promoting Gaza, and 4 new Green MPs, which is, I guess, a good sign for that kind of movement.
It is a very good sign, and our party got 210,194 votes, the largest ever vote for a left of Labour party in history. And I'm extremely proud of it, and you were one of those who contributed to that. So if you add the 5 that were elected, including Mr. Corbyn, to whom I'll turn in a minute, if you add the votes that we got, if you add the independent votes that didn't make it but nearly made it, got thousands of votes, came second, in some cases a close second, then it's evident that there was a mass electoral uprising in Britain. It didn't affect the overall outcome, but it did send a shockwave through the political establishment, the media establishment, that will not easily or quickly be forgotten, at least if I've got anything to do with it. Now, I called last night. Mr. Corbyn rang me on Saturday, and I had a very good conversation with him. And I called last night publicly for Mr. Corbyn to lead a people's front, a popular front, exactly like the one launched by Mr. Mélenchon, which won the French parliamentary elections yesterday. That's the kind of path down which we should travel. Mr. Corbyn is the best man to lead it. He has the benefit of a parliamentary seat. He has the benefit of 40 years of experience, and there is much love and affection for him in the country. So we, our party, yours and mine, are inviting Mr. Corbyn to lead us, to form a front of all the campaigning organizations, all the solidarity movements, all the political parties like ours, form us all into a front which he should lead, and we will follow him. I think that's the best way to make the maximum impact. Nick Buckley, MBE, former Manchester mayoral candidate, is on the line from Manchester. Nick, good to see you again. I recall you were a guest of mine on my television show. I was much impressed. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, George. First of all, I wanted to say that, first of all, you've always been an enigma to me. I used to watch your show on RT until that was taken off normal TV, then I couldn't watch it anymore, because you always gave me something different to think about. I don't always agree with you, but you gave me something to think about. I have a friend living in Rochdale who runs an anti-child sexual abuse project, and he's told me you're the only MP who's ever given him any time. So those 54 days you was an MP, thank you for speaking to him and thank you for helping him. And then my last compliment really is I was so impressed when you was in the US Congress for your bravery, the way you stuck up for yourself and what you said. I was in awe that someone from this country could go over there in a hostile environment and give them what for the way you believed it to be. I was extremely impressed.
Thank you.
My question really is, the history of my lifetime in the West really is, we keep interfering in other countries and other parts of the world, and we never get the result we thought we were going to get. Is Gaza just the latest version of this? That we think we're on the right side, we think we're helping, but we've got no idea what's going on, how things will turn out. And shouldn't we have learnt the lessons of Iraq, Libya, everywhere else, and say to ourselves, no, we're just not getting involved, and we need that part of the world to sort themselves out?
Yeah, I entirely agree with every word that you said in that second or last part of your contribution. I entirely agree with it. And it is a hangover from an imperial past that we have never shaken off. So, for example, when I highlighted in Manchester our campaign manifesto launch, that Britain was spending £12,000 per minute on weapons and war, I couldn't help but think, as you're probably thinking now, all the things we could have done with that money. I've already been speaking to you for 3-4 minutes, £12,000 a minute. We could have opened a youth club just with the proceeds of the last 4 minutes. And it's £12,000 of every minute, every day, every week, month, and year. It is utterly anti-British to be fixated on sailing round the world, interfering in other people's business. And as you, in the best thing you said in that question, it never turns out the way we were told it was going to turn out. It never, ever, ever does. Our invasion of Iraq, our invasion of Afghanistan, our involvement in war after war after war, it never turns out the way that we were told it would. And it always turns out to make matters worse. So I'm for bringing the money back home. You know, as a candidate for mayor in Manchester, and I know as a member of parliament on and off for almost 40 years, the things our people, our country desperately need, but can't have because we're told there's no money, but the money is being spent on war around the world, weapons and war around the world. And I believe that, you know, trust me on this, Nick, you might not believe this, but I swear before God that it is true. I would much rather spend all day, every day, talking about Britain, about British people, about British problems, applying my energy and whatever gift God has given me to solving our problems. But we can't get out of this endless cycle of war and interference in other people's affairs. My last point on this, I think perhaps you might agree with me on this. The Royal Navy is in the Red Sea, the Black Sea, the South China Sea. The only sea it isn't in is the English Channel, where people can come across in a dinghy at will anytime they like and get set up in a hotel near you at £80 per night for the hotelier. Nice work for him, not so nice for the rest of the British public. Thank you, Nick, for that excellent contribution. Mohsen Farkani is a PhD student in Iran, in Tehran, where they've just elected a new president, another election, another new leader. Mohsen, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon, George. Thanks for having me here today. Yeah, as you mentioned, a reformist president, Dr. Pezeshkian, received the majority of Iranian ballots on Friday. As one of the main untouchable policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran, support for Palestine will continue, albeit in a way that the Israelis will not appreciate it. President Pezeshkian's approach to supporting Palestine is based on the position of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and international laws to condemn Israel's crimes in Gaza and to put Israel under international pressure. He will not allow Israel to securitize Iran and hide its crimes, in Gaza behind securitization of Iran. Therefore, my question for you as the UK Member of Parliament is, with respect to recognized international law, how will the new British administration respond to the pressure exerted on Israel by the Iranian government? Thank you.
Well, it's a classic case of vindication of the point I made to the questioner about Hamas. I can't even pronounce yet the name of your president. I'm not going to attempt to. I have no view over whether he was the best of the two candidates in the runoff. But I absolutely support the right of the Iranian people themselves alone to elect the president that they want. And they did. And so I have to respect that. And if anyone is saying, I suspect that they will not, but if anyone is saying that, well, we don't recognize the new Iranian president, that is not only foolish, it is wicked. The Iranians picked a guy who they wanted as their president, and everyone has to accept that. Everyone has to accept it and respect it. And I am sure, not just from what you said, but from what little I know about the two candidates, that if there was anything on which both of them were absolutely united, it was on the need to support the Palestinian people in their agony and to provide them with the wherewithal to defend themselves. After all, everybody's got a right to defend themselves, right? If Israel attacks Lebanon, Lebanon has a right to defend itself, right? If the Israelis invade and occupy the Gaza Strip, the people of the Gaza Strip have got the right to defend themselves, right? And therefore helping them to exercise their right to defend themselves has to be the honorable thing to do, right? And I'm sure that Iran will continue to do that. Warren Thornton is a journalist of note and of my acquaint. He's in the West Country. Warren, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, George. Given that the current new Prime Minister lost many, many votes in his own constituency, his first speech was not for the British people, but for NATO. And he's nominated David Lammy as his Foreign Secretary. Are we already seeing the start of Starmageddon?
How perfectly expressed. That's why you're a journalist of note. The progress of the Starmer government is turning out to be even more nightmarish than our worst fears might have suggested. The brute Lammy is now in charge of British diplomacy around the world. And if you know David Lammy, like I know David Lammy, you must be rather afraid of that. You wouldn't send this man into a school playground to break up a group of squabbling kids. The idea that he is in charge of our foreign affairs is simply nightmarish. Starmer has brought back the dregs, the sweepings of the Blair and Brown saloon, appointing them as lords and ladies and putting them straight into the British cabinet when he already has 400 and something MPs that he could have chosen from. He's bringing back the right-hand men and women of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. It's going to be a very, very rocky ride. And unless the British people can get their act together and try and stop this roller coaster, we may well be on our way to Starmageddon. His first call, as you rightly implied, was to Joe Biden. I don't know if Joe Biden knows who he is or knows that the telephone call even took place. But in that telephone call, and we have the actuality, Keir Starmer pledged himself to potential war with America's enemies in America's service, in exactly the same way as Tony Blair did with George W. Bush in the run-up to the Afghan, then the war against Iraq. The second call that he made, Warren, I don't know if you are aware of this, the second call Keir Starmer made was to Benjamin Netanyahu. And Starmer's spokesman, in writing, said afterwards that the British Prime Minister thanked Prime Minister Netanyahu and looked forward to a deepening of relations between our two friendly countries. You couldn't make it up, Warren. Unfortunately, you had no need to. It really happened. My apologies to those that didn't get on the show this evening. Please try again next week and we'll prioritize your call. It's been a remarkable show in which from A to Z we covered the world political scene, and we had as a guest one of the few heroes of the last 9 months, and she's been doing it for many years. I metaphorically take my hat off to Francesca P, the Special United Nations Rapporteur for Palestine for the occupied territories. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, tell your friends, and all of you come back next week at the same time to have it out with Galloway.